Let us begin by reading from our passage this morning, Matthew chapter 9, verse 14. Then the disciples of John came to him, saying, "Why do we and the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "Can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast. No one puts a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment, for the patch tears away from the garment, and a worse tear is made. And neither is new wine put into old wineskins. If it is, the skins burst, and the wine is spilled, and the skins are destroyed. But new wine is put into fresh wineskins, and so both are preserved." So Jesus describes the nature of his mission: to bring transforming joy. The circumstances which bring about this description come because Jesus is being questioned, the way that he was acting, the way that he was allowing his disciples to act. Well, this just did not sit right with some people. Now, the disciples of John the Baptist lumped themselves in with the Pharisees, which is never an advisable starting point. That's rather an obvious thing to those of us living today, and probably should have been to the disciples even then. It was their master, after all, who, upon seeing the Pharisees come to the Jordan to witness his ministry, called them a brood of vipers, whom God would soon cut down at the root. And yet, here we find these men lumping themselves in with the Pharisees, saying, "Hey, Jesus, we do all of this fasting to show our religious piety, but your disciples don't." Which I think this is a very common thing to fall into when practicing a spiritual life. I think rightly we want something to live out. Faith is something that begins in the inside of a person, but I think we all realize that faith is something that must work its way out. And so the Jewish people, they had their ways, their traditions, their acceptable modes of living out the spiritual life. But Jesus just didn't seem to care about some of those. And some people see an accusation in the question posed to Jesus. I'm not sure. Maybe there is a hint of that. I mean, here's the thing about fasting, and this is the thing about a lot of hard practices we might do for the sake of our religion. We do those things starting out as an act of personal devotion, but this is human nature. Very soon, very easily, these things which, we started out doing for God can become the basis by which we start judging other people. Well, we do this. Those people over there, they say they believe in God, but they don't do this thing that we're doing. And then the feeling that we might have is that something is very wrong with those other people. They say they have the same faith, but they act differently. And maybe that's a threat. Maybe it brings out our own insecurities, but regardless, judging others is often the result. And, I think people have grown very averse to religion. And this tendency of looking down on others, perhaps this is partly why. But looking down on others, that is something, you literally never find Jesus doing. That just wasn't his thing. And that's not what he came to do. What he came to do was to bring transforming joy. And that sounds much better. And Jesus wants to explain this as well as he can. And so he draws, with his words, 3 different pictures. And I like that. I think it can help us to think in pictures. And so there are 3 pictures that describe what real religion should look like. And some people maybe don't want to hear that word, religion, but this is our word. This is the word that the Bible itself uses to describe how we live our faith. It's just, we have a picture. We have to picture religion differently than it is often portrayed by so many. And that's Jesus' whole point here. The question the disciples of John ask is a question of religion. There's no escaping that. They had a certain picture of what religion should look like. I think they came to the point where they could say, look, everyone here in the room believes in God. We can agree on that. That's fine. That's one thing. But here's what we have thought about things over here. And Jesus says, well, Very good, very good. That's the old way. That's like a ripped up shirt. Now, most of us would just go and buy a new shirt. But they didn't have Target back then. So they were going to patch that old thing up. And so maybe that's what they were thinking about Jesus. Sure, these old ways are rather beat up. It's what we're used to. We love them. They're very good. They're very nice. But they're old. But let's just add Jesus to the mix of what we are already doing, and there you go. Not going to work. That old shirt has already been through the wash, which means it's already shrunk. That patch there still has some shrinking to do. So you put that new patch onto that old shirt, and once it comes out of the dryer, well, you're going to have an even worse rip than when you started. And that's what can happen to us too if we think along the lines of these religious men we find here in our passage. We just keep on going on with our old ways, the ways that have worked in the past for us, only now we say, hey, we have Jesus too. And so what's going to happen when we do that? What's going to happen is that we are going to be even worse off than before. Because not only are we still doing things the old way, but now we're hypocrites too, because we're throwing around the name of Jesus while we do it. Now, obviously, this interpretation is a little different than Jesus' original meaning. You know, the Jewish people had religious customs that came directly from God, although the issue at hand was likely some optional fasting days that had been added to what God originally required. But either way, you know, usually the things in our life that we did before we became Christians, well, let's just say those things were certainly not from God. But even so, the main point Jesus has here applies across the board. You see, because Jesus came to bring something new. And that new thing, well, you know, it's going to change things. And that can be illustrated by the wineskins because, you know, the old ways of looking at things, the old ways of living our lives just simply cannot hold the new. It's alchemically incompatible. Old wineskins got brittle, you see. Well, they used to make them from animal skins. And at first, the skin would have some elasticity, which was good because of the chemical reactions that happen as wine ferments. Well, they release gases. And those gases would, start to push up against the wineskin, causing tension. And that tension, if the wineskin was old and brittle, well, that tension would eventually result in the old wineskin bursting open, which would have been spectacular to see, but not so great if you actually wanted to drink the wine, because now the wine would be ruined. And why are we talking about all of this? Well, because Jesus has a point. This is the thing those disciples had to realize, and this is what we have to realize as well. Nobody sits around moping and fasting and doing all of those other religious-looking things when there is a wedding going on, because it's just like the wine. A wedding is meant to bring joy. And why did Jesus come? Well, he came to bring transforming joy, something new that changes us. Something new that joyfully changes us. Now look, there was a certain way, a certain form of religion before Jesus came, and those practices were right and fine in their time, but now Jesus has come, and when Jesus comes, things change. And when Jesus comes, how we live our life, that's going to be different. How we see things in our life, well, that's going to be completely different too. And that's what Jesus is talking about. Because here's the thing. There was a chance we still don't know what Jesus is talking about, because Jesus, he gave us these three pictures, and the theoretical point is communicated well enough, I suppose, in these three pictures. But here's what Jesus is going to do. He's not only going to talk about how he brings transforming joy, he's also then going to go out and show us what he means by that. So, let's read these next two stories, and then we are really going to see about transforming joy, okay? While he was saying these things to them, behold, a ruler came in and knelt before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live." And Jesus rose and followed him with his disciples. And behold, a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years, came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. For she said to herself, if only I touch his garment, I will be made well. Jesus turned, and seeing her, he said, take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well. And instantly the woman was made well. And when Jesus came to the ruler's house and saw the flute players and the crowd making a commotion, he said, go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl arose. And the report of this went through all of that district. So now these two interlocking stories have Jesus demonstrating exactly how he brings transforming joy into our lives. The woman who suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years would have been ceremonially unclean during that entire span of her life. So just as the leper we encountered a few weeks ago, her situation would have been one of isolation and alienation, both from man and God. So, she is not well in her body. But I think it is also fair to say that, she wasn't exactly quite well in her mind either, because as we can see, she's a very superstitious woman. She believes that Jesus is powerful, but that this power is related to charged objects. Thus, she believes that by touching Jesus, she can steal a little healing power for herself. She is superstitious. And yet, Jesus tells her that even despite that superstition, she had faith. She didn't really think about everything the right way before she met Jesus. Even in seeking Jesus out, she did not seek Jesus out with perfect theology, but she sought Jesus out nonetheless. And so Jesus shows us what it means to bring transforming joy. That those who are alienated from God in both their body and mind can be brought near to him. That those who are suffering can be made well, if only they reach out to the healer. But even more, for Jesus arrives at the ruler's house, and instead of superstition, he is met with probably something worse, mocking laughter. You see, the healer came a little too late, and on top of that, he tells them, no, she is not dead, only sleeping. Now, Jesus knew she had died, but there were people, Jewish people in those days, who did not believe in an afterlife. And so what they meant by dead was something different, which is why Jesus says she is not dead in the way you mean. It is very probable that the ruler whose daughter was lying dead held to that fatalist philosophy of the Sadducees, who denied the possibility of resurrection. And even if he was not a personal subscriber to that philosophy, certainly many who were there that day were. And that is why they laughed. Because to say, as Jesus did, that a person was only sleeping after they had died was to say that one day they would wake up on the day of resurrection. And this is why they mocked. They mocked the idea of hope. But what they didn't know was that Jesus came to bring transforming joy. What they didn't know was that standing before them that day was the resurrection and the life. And so Jesus takes this girl's hand and raises her up from death to life, from sleeping to wide awake. And now we see what Jesus means when he says the day of the bridegroom has come. Now we see what Jesus means when he says new wineskins for the new wine that I bring. Now we see what it means to bring transforming joy. It means that Jesus has come to bring new life, to bring resurrection life. And that is something that he can bring to each one of us today. And what do we mean when we say that we can be made alive today with the transforming joy that comes from being given resurrection life? We mean that even today we can become alive to God, to be alive to ourselves in new and wonderful ways, to be awake to the world around us as the world that God has made to be awake regarding the nature of our own lives, that every life given into the world is given by a loving God. And this is what we mean then when we say that today Jesus comes to bring transforming joy. This new life that Jesus brings gives us new eyes to see everything differently. It gives us something new to say to the world. As these next stories will show, let's read these final stories, shall we? And as Jesus passed on from there, 2 blind men followed him, crying aloud, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." When he entered the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus said to them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" And they said, "Yes, Lord." Then he touched their eyes, saying, "According to your faith, be it done to you." And their eyes were opened. And Jesus sternly warned them, "See that no one knows about it." But they went away and spread his fame through all that district. As they were going away, behold, a demon-oppressed man who was mute was brought to him. And when the demon had been cast out, the mute man spoke. And the crowds marveled, saying, never was anything like this seen in Israel. But the Pharisees said, "He casts out demons by the prince of demons." And you know what scoundrels these Pharisees were. I can't believe it. Presented by the same evidence as those who would believe in the joy that Jesus is bringing. They are presented with that evidence. Nevertheless, they draw much different conclusions, because it is only by the light of our own hearts can we see truth around us. And what shadows does a darkened heart cast? But Jesus comes to bring light to those darkened eyes. This is the transforming joy that Jesus brings, to open the eyes of the blind, to give a voice to those who cannot sing, to open up new possibilities for every one of us, even today. Let Jesus come to us and let him show us what it means. What transforming joy do we need today? Let us ask ourselves this question. If I was one of those people and Jesus came to me, what would it be that needs to change in my life? What would he change in my life so that I could experience the joy he brings? What transforming joy could he bring to me in my life today? A new and thankful perspective. Jesus can bring that joy. A new, hope-filled message. We have it. Spread his fame. Spread his fame. That is the joy that Jesus brings, that we can be freed from self-love and live to spread his fame. That we can have eyes to see and a voice to sing and a heart to hope for better things. And so let us end by saying this. Jesus' mission as Messiah was to bring transforming joy to all of those who would turn to him in faith. And that is still his mission today. And if there is anyone here who might need a little change, some change for the good, then here's what we have to do. We have to reach out in prayer to touch him. We have to turn our eyes upon Jesus. We have to come to him in faith. Small faith, large faith, medium faith. Faith is faith. Come to Jesus in faith. And if we would only turn our eyes upon him and seek him as the one who can change us and make us new, if only we turn to him as the one who can bring some transforming joy into our lives, then just like the people that we read about this morning, yes, just like Jesus did for them, Jesus will do for us. But we've got to turn our eyes upon Jesus. We've got to see him for who he is. Lord, help us to see. Let us pray.